Is USC finally going to reach its recruiting potential? Well, they're certainly trying as they try to keep JuJu Lewis.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth: realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. We got plenty of recruiting talk coming today, and this episode is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We've got our Locked On recruiting insider, Brian Smith, joining me today on the show, brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs, our recruiting sponsor here at the network. And Brian, USC has been in a continued battle, will continue to be in a battle to maintain the commitment of five-star quarterback JuJu Lewis, who we have talked about on this show before. It's not going to be easy, but it feels like it's ever more possible, dare I say likely, with the way USC is recruiting in the class of 2025. And I think if you look at their past couple of recruiting classes, you'd say they're fine, solid, good, but not at USC's full potential. They currently have the fourth best class in 2025. What do you make of it?
I think it's very surprising on how they developed the class. They got kids from down south. They got a few kids out west, but it's random. And they got a bunch of them in a short spurt that were down south. So I'm not sold they're going to keep all those kids, but they've always tried to get some. Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi. This is the year, apparently, but they also switched defense coordinators, which I think helps. They certainly need to do that in the offseason. That probably is helping the Trojans quite a bit.
They have 12 commits in the class of 2025 right now. Of their top 5, you've got JuJu Lewis in there, who's been committed since last August, and despite other schools' best efforts, they have not been able to get him to decommit or flip yet, though he was recently at Indiana, which was a pretty wild thing to see. And we'll maybe get to that in just a moment. But 4 of the top 5 highest-rated players for USC in this 2025 class, which again is currently 4th nationally according to 24/7 Sports, are on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that's an incredibly notable development, because if USC starts bringing in defensive players like that, and Lincoln Riley keeps churning out offensive players the way that we know he's capable of and has every year, including last season, USC could become what Lincoln Riley has, kind of sold the program on being since he first got to Los Angeles.
Yeah, you got to get both sides of the ball working in recruiting consistently. When he first got there, he went transfer portal heavy. Very heavy. And they just didn't have enough guys on the lines. There aren't enough, in case you haven't followed it. The portal is more skill guys and quarterbacks for whatever reason. The D lineman and O lineman, there's a few, but not the numbers that you need. You got to win those in the high school ranks for whatever reason. USC didn't do enough of that, and they paid for it. Think about that. Caleb Williams last year, and they were 7-5, I believe. That's unacceptable on so many levels. So the reason was they got their butts beat up front. They've made an adjustment. They got a new coordinator. They've changed their recruiting philosophy, really delved into the high school ranks and nationally too. From coast to coast, they're recruiting everywhere. They did that some under Pete Carroll, but now they're getting kids early. Not only are they getting JuJu, and I get the quarterback. That's probably not that difficult for Lincoln Riley, but they're getting defensive players now. So here's the question. Can they not only keep them, but can they keep the really elite ones that are down south? Like Justice Terry is committed. I would bet my bottom dollar they do not sign him. That is just my opinion. I think he's the best overall prospect in the country, and he's from a little itty-bitty town in Georgia. Great kid, but he just fits the South. Prove me wrong. But that's USC's challenge. Like, they used to get some of those guys, and that's why they had a dynasty going for a while. They got to get them again if they want to get back to that level.
And step one to changing that aspect of your program, if you're Lincoln Riley, is getting those guys to verbally commit. But then if you get them to sign, I think that's a name definitely to watch for in Justice Terry, to see if they keep him committed. Later in the show, we're going to talk about Elijah Griffin, who's a 5-star defensive lineman that they are in the final 3 for. And the other teams there are Georgia and Miami. And that's just not on the defensive side. Offensively, they had Zachariah Branch last year. They've brought in highly rated running backs, quarterback. Like, that hasn't been the problem for USC. It's been the lack of depth and high end talent in the trenches. Like they have a guy like Bear Alexander, but then is the rest of the roster good enough? Obviously, it was not a season ago. But I want to bring this back to Juju for a moment because I saw the visit he took to Indiana. He had a guitar in one of them. I don't know.
I saw that. I don't know. I know Juju. I've never seen him play guitar though.
I don't know who comes up with that sort of stuff. I mean, we're talking about it on the show. Like it's an image that sticks in my head. So, I mean, I guess that's the whole point, right? It is to get, attention and get people talking about it and such. But, I saw him in the Indiana gear and just thought, man, that's a heck of a job by the new staff there in Bloomington to even get him on campus for a visit. But when you and I talk about the competition for JuJu Lewis, which is still fierce, USC, still obviously the leader, he's still verbally committed. Indiana's not going to be one of those teams that could actually get him, right?
There's some kind of connection with one of the coaches that came over to Indiana in the offseason that knows Lewis. I forget the person's name, so I apologize, but that's the connection. The chances of them signing him are about the chances of me being recruited by Dan Lanning. I'm 50 years old. It's not going to happen. So, and I'm saying this as an Indiana grad. It's not happening. So, yeah.
You're an Indiana grad?
I am.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, anyway, on the JuJu Lewis front, the other teams are the Georgias of the world that are continuing to make a push. Have you heard anything or gotten a sense that Lewis is close to flipping his commitment from USC? And how much do you think this recruiting class could help be a selling point to prevent him from going elsewhere? Because I think it's about the best thing you could do if you're Lincoln Riley is go to JuJu and say, hey, we recognize the shortcomings we've had the last couple of seasons as we've still had an 11-win campaign and appeared in a Pac-12 championship game, but we are fully aware that we got to give you a team around you and it not just be you by the time you're starting here, and here are the guys you're going to play with. I think that's a pretty strong sales pitch.
It's the perfect one. Nobody wants to go somewhere, especially if it's across the country, and lose. That's not a good time. Like 7-5 last year probably did not help USC's cause, but now they're recruiting better. They hired a better defensive coordinator. So they've done the right things. Now they got to finish by getting some more playmakers for him, et cetera, which is ironic because like USC typically struggles in there. That Branch kid, by the way, is unbelievable.
Yeah, he's a ball player.
Great kid too. I just think that it's an interesting race now because Alabama just got Keelan Russell to flip. He was committed to SMU's Duncanville kid, great player. So Alabama's probably out of the JuJu sweepstakes. Georgia's already got a commitment, but do I think they would still take him if JuJu called? Probably. The school that's most likely to flip him is Auburn, and they are all in on recruiting JuJu. All in, and he knows the great receiver corps they got last year in the recruiting class, including Cam Coleman, Barry Thompson, etc. There's a chance that he could flip just there, and it's a 2-hour drive from Carrollton to Auburn. It's an easy drive. I don't think that's going to be very difficult to convince his parents where they would rather him go, but JuJu loves the SC staff. So this might carry off all the way into the fall, which that's just recruiting in modern day. But I don't really consider him committed because he keeps taking trips.
Yeah, and I think that USC has got the ultimate sales pitch, which is our head coach is Lincoln Riley, and he's got Heisman winner, Heisman winner, Heisman winner, Heisman runner-up on his resume as a head coach. He hasn't even been a head coach for a decade. There are coaches that go offensive coaches their entire career and don't generate as many Heisman finalists and winners as Lincoln Riley's done. So that, of course, is the ultimate pitch. But you mentioned the skill position thing. They've got 2 running backs, an athlete, and a wide receiver committed in their 2025 class, and they're not the highest rated players. And that I think that is good. I think that's good overall, especially in the portal era. Build your high school classes in the trenches and, have a couple of skill position guys, but Zachariah Branch will still be there next year because he's a true sophomore this season. So I'm not worried about USC having offensive weapons and guys for JuJu to throw the football to. But we still have more to get to with Brian because there's some big time names to know in the class of 2025. And look, for reasons that I can't fully explain, we got to talk about Stanford because they're making noise in the recruiting world. That's coming up next. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You can save up to 60%, which is over half, buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you're looking for. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Brian, let's talk about some big names in the class of 2025. And Josh Petty is a guy who puts together one of those recruiting team lists that makes you just kind of do one of those. For those on podcasts, I'm scratching my head. So his reported finalists are Florida State, no surprise. Ohio State, no surprise. Tennessee, Georgia Tech is in the mix. That's not the most surprising one, Brian. Stanford is in the mix. And okay, let me just get your reaction. Like, how do you explain that? It's Stanford. How are they here?
Academics. Georgia Tech's a high-end academic school too, but he lives on the edge of Atlanta. He can be at Georgia Tech's campus in less than a half hour. I'm guessing they're doing a good job recruiting, though. They got kids that have committed from Mississippi. They've gotten kids from like Florida, et cetera, all over the South. Their staff does a good job. They put in the effort. Andrew Babalola, we'll talk about him in a minute. He's a kid from Kansas, basically just outside of Kansas City, that they have a shot at. They recruit nationally. They go at it hard, and they have an academic degree to sell that most don't. So I guess that's a pitch for some kids that they want. Duke does it, Notre Dame, Vanderbilt. There's different levels of it, but Stanford was 3-9 last year and lucky to be 3-9. For them to come off of that season and do this in recruiting is quite impressive.
Yeah, I agree. But the other schools in the mix, Florida State, who you, of course, cover on Locked On Seminoles, Ohio State, Tennessee, and Georgia Tech in the fold as well. Do you think that this is an academic consideration with the two big-time academic schools in there? Do you think it's going to be one of Stanford and Georgia Tech, or do you feel like Florida State has got a chance here to land one of the most highly sought-after 2025 offensive tackle recruits?
I like Florida State because his sister's going to go to school at Florida State. There is that's a bargaining chip.
Is she an athlete too?
I can't remember, but I don't even care.
Right.
If she's going there, then it's all over with, in my opinion, because family matters. Good luck to those recruiting against them. That's tough. But when I found that out like a week ago, like, oh, that's game changer. Good luck. But he's got offers from everybody. He's got like 40 offers.
Yeah, so the other five-star offensive tackle I wanted to talk to you about, going back to Stanford here for a moment, is Andrew Babalola. And On3 logged a prediction for him to land at Stanford. And by the way, this is a Stanford coaching staff that is going into the ACC, because why wouldn't a school in Palo Alto, California, be a part of the Atlantic Coast Conference? That makes perfect sense in my mind. I don't know what could possibly be illogical or weird about that, but they've got a prediction to land him there. They got Elijah Brown in the 2024 cycle, who is probably going to compete to start at quarterback this year. I think they should start him, frankly. I mean, Ashton Daniels last year, he was fine, capable, had his moments, but didn't put up the most incredible numbers and such. I just look at these recruiting wins and go, you're not supposed to be able to get that at Stanford in 2024 because they don't play the NIL game. They don't play the transfer portal game. They're supposed to be going down. But if you go back and look at even the end of the David Shaw years, they recruited at a top 20, top 30 sort of level. And it feels like Troy Taylor, as they go into the ACC, is trying to get them back to that range.
I got to give him a lot of credit. I didn't see it coming. I thought they were going to,
That's how I felt.
I thought they were going to be a 2-10 football team once NIL got here. And I thought they were doomed. That kind of school just will not, they're not going to do the things that Georgia and Ohio State and Texas, they're not. So the degree is valuable. But this goes back to the old saying, relationships matter. It's recruiting effort. Think about what he could do if he was at a name school with this kind of effort. Like if he was at Texas A&M, if he was at Oklahoma or Florida State. It's a little easier there academically to get kids into at those schools, by the way. Just a smidgen. They're putting in effort because most kids don't want to put up with the academics you got to do at Stanford. And the application process is over 10 pages, from what I'm told, unless it's changed. Like it is not friendly. Just to get the application done is hard. So, you know what? Give them credit. I'm guessing that the degree is a big part, but this is still more than anything else about relationships because they were awful last year. That is not easy to sell. What are they running on their highlights? Like in the when you walk into the foyer at Stanford, what highlights are they running?
Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, that's been a minute. Okay, he was NFL
player. That's what you go for.
Because they were awful. Like they're hard to watch, and they still are getting these kids. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think Troy Taylor is a pretty solid coach. Like their roster last year, I think they were just outmatched in basically every game. They had that crazy comeback at Colorado in Boulder on a Friday night.
Wasn't it 29-0 or something?
I think it was 29-0 or 26-0, somewhere in that range. I mean, that was one of the craziest things. They threw a slant for 97 yards and a touchdown. It was just one of those games. Alec Manor went for, I think it was 294 or 109. I don't know. He had some ridiculous game at wide receiver. Like Stanford could be okay. I don't know if they make a bowl game, but like if you told me right now they win 5 games, I don't know if I'd be completely and utterly shocked.
I wouldn't be shocked because they haven't done anything that I thought they were going to.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And by the way, you're going to have ACC teams. Now they have to make cross-country trips, but you're going to have ACC teams traveling to the farm, and that's a long way to go in an environment that probably won't be incredible. It can be tough to get up for. The farm can be a trap spot here. But let's go back to the recruiting trail. A couple names to talk about. One is not committed. One has. Elijah Griffin, 5-star defensive lineman. Going back to the USC conversation. Georgia, Miami, USC. I think this is the D'Anton Lynn factor, and I have been a fan of this hire since USC announced it not long after the season, and I thought it was an indictment of UCLA, and I also thought it was a boon to USC and a testament to what Lincoln Riley is trying to do, and this is the sort of guy that I don't think USC is in the mix for when Alex Grinch is the defensive coordinator.
Agreed. I still think he's going to sign with Georgia. That's where his grandmother has kind of signed off on him going. She's close with him. But Miami's put in all kinds of effort to get him. USC's in on him. You got to try. Because like this kid as an 8th grader looked like he was a college player. So he was that guy that was just physically developed way early. He walks in a room, you would know it. You got to try if you're SC. That visit is going to be everything. They're only going to get so many shots. Like he's been to Georgia probably more times than he can count. It's like a 3.5-hour drive. It's no big deal. USC is a plane ride. So good luck. Miami's also a plane ride. That's a long trip to drive from Savannah down to Coral Gables. But those are the only 2 that are reportedly in the mix, which is kind of weird. He doesn't do camps. He really doesn't do much media. So we really don't know much more than that.
Another name that I want to talk about that will get you out of here on for today, Brian, is just the name of all names, and that's Bo Jackson. Because no, Bo Jackson has not somehow regained eligibility by applying through a waiver to the NCAA. This is just, a guy who is committed to Ohio State, had some other notable schools after him, but this feels like, rinse and repeat for Ohio State, ho-hum, another dynamic skill player.
He is, but he also is a power guy. He's over 200. Like he's a thumper. He's got good open field speed, but he's a little different dimension than what Ohio State had last year. That's a good player. I did Ohio State's podcast today on the Locked On Network. I'm like, this kid's going to play. Worst case scenario by end of fall camp, I bet he's 3rd string. They pick up the playbook and all that. Like he's physically gifted enough to start at Ohio State as a freshman. Playbook, pass protection, those things will dictate whether he does. But you can't teach the grown man strength. Like when he runs into somebody, you better be ready. Because if you're not in a tackling position, you will be YouTubed. And you still might be.
Yeah, and he's a guy who's going to slide in at running back, it feels, yeah?
Oh, yeah. That's his calling.
He feels like a one-to-one stylistic replacement for Travion Henderson to me. Like, has that explosive playmaking potential, but is a little bit more of a bruiser. And Ohio State, best backfield in all college football. Why? They got thunder and lightning. Quinshon Judkins, a little bit more lightning. Travion Henderson, a little bit more thunder. And certainly both guys are well-rounded backs, but if not anything else, I could not let the opportunity to talk about Bo Jackson in college football go by the wayside. You can't do that with a name like that. Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider here at the network. Check him out on X, formerly known as Twitter at FBScout_Florida. Brian, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you, sir.
Big games to watch in 2024. Joel Klatt released his 10 biggest games, and well, some of them are going to be more fun than others. That's coming up next. The college football season's a lot closer than most of us probably realize, which is why it is appropriate to talk about the games that are going to make an impact one way or the other. So Joel Klatt released his top 10 games that will impact the 2024 season. I'm not going to go through the entire list here, at least not today, but a couple things did stand out. First game that is of big note to me is Georgia at Alabama, September 28th. We are going to learn what I talked about recently here on the show in that game. How good is Alabama? Are we just overthinking the room and need to realize that Kalen DeBoer has done nothing but win everywhere he's ever gone, and Alabama's not going to be any different? In fact, it could be different in the opposite direction in that he could win even more. We're going to know in that game because Georgia's the preseason national title favorite. They're the preseason SEC favorite, not just in the betting markets, but in my head. That's the way I think about it. Everybody's looking up at Georgia. 2 of the last 3 national championships, arguably the best roster in college football, or at least among them. They've got a great quarterback, Heisman caliber guy in Carson Beck. Kirby Smart's a great coach. That Georgia game in Tuscaloosa, September 28th, going to be wildly entertaining. I think we learn more about Alabama that day than Georgia. If that game is close, that is not going to be an indictment of Georgia to me. That is going to be a credit to Alabama. Because Alabama, this should be, as I've long stated, the worst Kalen DeBoer Alabama team that he will have in his tenure in Tuscaloosa, however long that is. This is going to be the worst one. That doesn't mean they're going to be bad. It just means they're not going to be as good as they will be in the coming years. So you better get Alabama now. This is the year. This is an open year to get Alabama, and it's still not going to be easy. Georgia is a favorite going into Tuscaloosa to play Alabama by 3.5 points. That seems about right. That seems about right. I think I'd lean towards Georgia's roster a little bit. I like Georgia's quarterback more, though Jalen Milroe certainly impressed me over the second half of last season. I think you put him with Kalen DeBoer. It's an interesting fit, and we will learn how good of a fit it can be in that particular game. You can't have entire season-long takeaways after one game, but you'll have played several contests by that point. I don't think Georgia and Alabama are going to suffer a loss. I think Alabama will be able to go into Wisconsin and win. But that game, September 28th, we're going to learn a lot about Alabama in that game. Speaking of the SEC, how about Texas? How about Texas 3 weeks prior to that? At Michigan, week 2. Now, there are some who think that I don't like Michigan. I don't know why you get that notion. I just have my opinions on Michigan. That game at the Big House could very well decide whether or not Michigan goes to the playoff this year. Could absolutely decide, because at 9-3, you're not getting into the playoff. Even SEC or Big Ten, 9-3, you're not getting into the playoff. But 10-2, any Power 4 school, including ACC and Big 12, whose chances are more remote than SEC or Big Ten, obviously, because the caliber of the conferences is different. And I think that's how the committee will approach such matters. Texas at Michigan could be the difference between Michigan going 9-3 and 10-2. And here's the other thing. It would put a high quality win on the resume for Sharon Moore and company. Now, Texas is going to be the favorite in that game. They absolutely should be, because Texas on paper is the better team. But are games played on paper? No, No, they're not. And Texas, just a 3.5-point favorite. So think about that. In the eyes of Vegas, the gap between Texas and Michigan is the same gap between Georgia and Alabama. Just worth noting. But like the Alabama game that I mentioned, we'll learn a lot about Michigan there. They open with Fresno State, who is going to be a good team in the Mountain West. Michigan should not have any problems there. If they do, you question how they will fare against Texas, and that line may move from 3.5 to 5.5 or 6.5, depending on how they look. But if they look the way that I expect them to, they're about a 21-point favorite in that game. If they win by 4 or 5 touchdowns, then that's going to set up a big game at the big house. And Texas going into Michigan is a far cry from what Michigan has done in the last few seasons in the non-conference slate, which is how I've been critical of them recently here on the show, and frankly for the last couple of years, because I think it's terrible. I think it's terrible that you can play a non-conference schedule as a team, especially as a program that's competing for, and of course winning, a national championship, that you can avoid playing any Power 5 school in your non-conference slate. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's patently absurd. And so I commend Michigan for having this game on the schedule because they canceled that home and home with UCLA. And I don't like that. I didn't like that. I still don't like that. It still bugs me. But that is not the case this year. You can't look at Michigan's schedule and say, they don't have anybody. It's just Ohio State. No, they got tough games on there. They got to host Oregon. They, of course, have to go to Ohio State. And they got to play Texas. So they'd have to play the rest of their schedule perfect. But if you were to lose, just as an example, to Oregon and Ohio State, but you beat Texas there, and those Oregon and Ohio State losses are close, yeah, Michigan could be a playoff team this year. But if you lose that game, I think Michigan's playoff hopes probably go away. That's going to be a difficult one. Speaking of those two games and the teams involved, how about we take the two teams the two teams that are favored on the road in those big games, and we put them against each other. October 19th, Georgia at Texas. Look, I don't like SEC realignment. I don't like Big Ten realignment. I don't like realignment in general for the most part. I think there are some moves that make sense, but most of them don't. Georgia at Texas, October 19th. Did you know that Georgia's schedule is, according to, I forget which metric, but there was a computer-generated metric that said Georgia had the third toughest schedule in all of college football? It's kind of right. Georgia's schedule is not easy. They open with Clemson. I think they're winning that game. It's in Atlanta. It's a neutral site, quote-unquote game. I think they're winning that one. But could I see them losing to Alabama? Yeah, that's Kalen DeBoer. I'm never counting that guy out of a game, even with Kirby Smart. They have to go at Texas. If Georgia goes 2-0 in those games, end the college football season, or everyone else mentally end the season, because if Georgia's winning both of those games, and if they do so convincingly, then I don't think anybody's going to beat them. They should be the favorites. No doubt about it. They also have to go to Ole Miss. Does that seem easy? I don't think so. I think it's pretty tough. They, of course, play Florida in a neutral site game. They're going to beat Florida. Sorry. Tennessee? Could Tennessee give them a push? They could. Those are all games on Georgia's schedule. I don't think they're going undefeated. I do not think they're going to once again have an undefeated regular season. I think they have at least one loss. Their win total is 10.5. I think there's decent value on the under, even though I think Georgia is a national title favorite and the SEC favorite. Because to go at Ole Miss, at Texas, at Alabama, give me another SEC road slate that's as difficult as that. Yeah, you get Tennessee at home. Gosh, I would hope so. Or else it would look like Greg Sankey and company are trying to get Georgia to lose as many games as they can. So those are just a couple of the big games that stood out to me when Joel Klatt released his top 10. I think we are going to learn a lot about Michigan and Alabama when they take on SEC teams, and then Georgia, Texas. It's just going to be a big game. I don't care for realignment, but that matchup, that will be fun. I will not argue that point. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.